Hello friends, welcome to A Gentle Healing Journey. My name is Rain Francis, and on this channel I talk about how to deal with life's struggles and challenges. I'm working my way through my psychology diploma and my life coaching certification, and as I gain knowledge and I apply this knowledge to my own life, I'm very happy to share this here with you in the YouTube community. I asked you this question in the last video that I posted. If your spouse passed away tomorrow, would you be prepared? I certainly was not prepared for the sudden death of my late husband a year ago. I wasn't prepared emotionally, financially, mentally, but I also wasn't prepared for the work that I had to do after the fact. I mentioned in the last video that my late husband did me a great favor by making a will and having it notarized. He had everything organized and listed out with all of his wishes written very clearly, so there was no room for error or misunderstanding when it came to anything. He made me his sole beneficiary and the sole executor of his estate. Now, for those who don't know, a beneficiary is the person who inherits the estate of the deceased person. The estate basically means everything that the deceased person owns, assets, but also what they owe, debts. An executor is the person who fulfills the last wishes of the deceased person, according to what they indicated in their last will and testament. So, for example, your loved one could leave you as the executor of the will, but have many beneficiaries. So your job would be to distribute things to all of the beneficiaries. Make sure that the funeral arrangements are fulfilled as per the deceased person's wishes and close up the estate, which basically means doing all of the administrative work so that the government and, I don't know, whatever companies out there, so that they know that this person has passed away. But before I get into all of that, I just wanted to explain the procedure. When you find a loved one who has passed away, what you would normally do, we would all just call 911 right away. So what happens when you call 911 is that the ambulance technicians are alerted and they're sent to your home. What happened in my case was that the ambulance technicians went into his room and verified that he was in fact dead. And we waited for the police to show up. The police also went in to verify his death, and then they questioned me about his death, about his suicide, about whether or not I was involved with his death. I had to give 2 verbal statements to 2 different officers. I don't know why. Maybe they wanted to see if I was giving the same story. I mean, I guess it's their job to figure out if there's, I don't know, anything suspicious about the death. But then I was asked to sit in a police car and give a formal statement that the officer wrote down for me as I spoke. At that point, the coroner had been contacted and he arrived separately. He also confirmed the death, and after speaking with me and speaking with the ambulance technicians and the police officers, he ruled my late husband's death as an obvious suicide. He said in a case like this, there is no need for an autopsy at all. It feels weird for me to discuss this so matter-of-factly because at the time I was devastated and I felt terror inside of me that I can't describe. I was in great shock, really confused, and I didn't feel well physically. You know, when the cause of death is uncertain, or if there is suspicion around the death, the coroner orders an autopsy to be done. If an autopsy is required, then it's performed by a forensic pathologist. This forensic pathologist is able to determine the cause of death. I was informed by the coroner that an autopsy is not something that has to be done legally speaking, but if there is a question about the cause of death, then the coroner has the right to demand an autopsy. For religious reasons or maybe personal reasons, the family of the deceased person can request to the coroner not to do an autopsy, and it would be up to the coroner as to whether or not the autopsy would be necessarily done in this case. So after the coroner confirmed his death, he then asked me where I wanted my late husband to be brought. And by that, he meant a funeral home. I didn't have to read the last will and testament to know that my husband wanted to be cremated. So that's what I told the coroner. I had no clue what funeral home to choose. I mean, I didn't even know any funeral homes in this area. So that question was just so surprising because I had no clue. But thankfully, the coroner knew of a place that was about an hour away where they did a really good job in taking care of things. So he contacted them, and then the funeral home's hearse showed up to remove my late husband's body. So after all that happened, feels like a whirlwind, what seems like never-ending questions, but quick decisions have to be made as you're processing the shock of what's just happened. I was very fortunate that I had very helpful people around me. So after all that, when I was alone, I decided to read his last will and testament. Unless you're familiar with legalese, that's legal speak, reading a last will and testament can be very challenging during that particular time. My late husband had no assets besides some musical instruments. He had no property. The house is mine. The car is mine. He had some debt, but otherwise it was a very straightforward last will and testament. He indicated that he wanted his body to be cremated, and he indicated where he wanted his ashes to be buried. He wrote a very exhaustive list of who he wanted to have which musical instrument, but he did indicate that because I was the sole beneficiary, that I could make the decision to either keep his musical instruments, give them away, or sell them to fund the afterlife costs. He also indicated that he didn't want me to contact his estranged family or friends until after his ashes were buried. To be honest with you, I never met most of his family, and they lived in the States. I'm in Canada. I never met his mother. I didn't know how to get in touch with any of them. So one of the first things I did was try to figure out a way how to contact them. And it took me a few weeks, which actually gave me enough time to receive his ashes and to bury his ashes where he wanted them buried. And just by luck, I found an email of his former best friend, and I contacted him. He had been in touch with my late husband's family for years because their parents knew each other, so he knew how to get in touch with them. Since I had met one of his sisters before, she was the first one that I contacted in the family. Her and the best friend were in complete shock when I told them, but not at all surprised at the same time. After that, I spoke with his mother for the very first time. It was difficult for me to break the news to her and to his family and former friends because I was kind of put in the position where I had to comfort them. And not that I didn't want to comfort them, but I needed someone to comfort me. I was going through this as well, and I felt like I couldn't properly grieve until they were all feeling better. I'm not in contact with any of them anymore. They were basically strangers to me, but my job was to contact them and let them know. There was a little bit of an issue when it came down to my late husband's assets. And unfortunately, I had to basically tell them what he had written in his will, which was that he didn't want any of them to have anything of his. That was a very difficult thing for me to have to relay, especially to his mother, but it got to the point where I felt like I had to put my foot down and tell them this. So during the first 6 months, I would say I was just trying to gain access to all of his online accounts, his credit card account, his bank account, his government tax account. There were just so many places that I had to contact and provide the death certificate in order to gain access to these places and accounts. It was a very long and grueling administrative process, and I have to say this very honestly, his bank was the worst. I contacted them and I told them that he had died, and that I needed to gain access to his accounts because whatever money he had, I wanted to put that against his credit card debt. They froze the accounts immediately and told me that I now owed money on his credit card. It was shocking because, first of all, I knew that wasn't true. They were trying to pull one over on me. And I thought, how despicable, because I was grieving. They were so cold. And I understand that it's just a bank, but there is such thing as a bedside manner, right? And they definitely didn't have a bedside manner. So after contacting the same woman plenty of times by email, I decided to call her. I was fed up. I told her that I was not going to pay his credit card balance because, legally speaking, it was not my responsibility. That if I needed to, I would declare bankruptcy on his behalf. It was a small balance, and I asked that the bank write it off. She kept refusing and arguing, and it was so frustrating. And just out of pure emotion, I blurted out how he died and what I had seen when I opened the door that morning. It kind of shocked her, and she said, okay, I'll take care of this. I got a letter about a month later saying that his credit card balance had been forgiven. He had a website that he wanted to keep active, but he didn't leave me any passwords, so I had to contact these companies and send them the death certificate and a copy of the will in some cases. And in one case, I had to actually go to a notary to fill out a form that one of these companies sent to me and have it notarized and sent back. This was for his domain names. It was a very long process. He also wanted me to contact certain people who I'd never met, so I did on his behalf. Again, this was difficult because they were in shock and I had to comfort them. He also wanted me to contact a list of dozens of musical publications with an obituary. He asked that I write the obituary, and that was really difficult for me because I didn't know how to write an obituary, but I think I did a good job in the end. And I contacted all of these places by email. Almost all of them got back to me and they agreed to publish his obituary. I had to go through all of his belongings as well and eventually box a lot of it up and put them into piles to either sell, keep, donate, recycle, or garbage. It's very difficult to go through a person's belongings after they die because, you tend to hold on to things and you place sentimental value on these things. In my case, I didn't really do that. I was able to separate the materialistic things from his memory, and I'm so grateful that I have that skill because otherwise I would have never gotten rid of anything. I still have a lot to go through, but this is going to come with time. I sent a few things to his sister and his mother, and then I decided I was going to empty his bedroom of everything. And now I use that room as the pet room. I could never use it as my own bedroom anymore, knowing what happened there, but all of the pet cages are in there, and that's where all the dogs eat, and my cat eats there as well. His estate was very easy to close, like I said. He didn't have any assets or investments. Everything was in my name, so there was no probate for his last will and testament. For those of you who don't know, probate is a legal approval process that confirms the validity of the will, and it appoints an executor if the chosen executor doesn't want to complete the task, or if there was no executor indicated. It's done through the courts, and it can sometimes take years. It all depends on how complicated the will is, but like I said, in my late husband's case, the will was very simple, so there was no need for probate. He had received some money by check. It wasn't much, but it was a little bit, and I wanted to be able to use that money. But because it was made out to the estate of, and then his name, I was not able to cash that check, even though I was the beneficiary. So I had to also open an estate account with my bank. And I did this last summer, and I kid you not, last week, April 13th, I signed the final document for that estate account. That's how long it took. So now any check that comes in under his name or the estate under his name. I can deposit it into the estate account, and then I can transfer the money into my bank account. It all just seems so overly complicated, doesn't it? Another thing to consider is the funeral. My late husband didn't want a funeral. He said he didn't want anything fancy. He made it very clear that he wanted the cheapest cremation possible. Cremation costs in the area of Canada where I live in 2025 started at about $4,000. Now, because my late husband was on social assistance, I was able to contact his caseworker and ask for help with the cremation costs. And to my very happy surprise, she told me the government would cover the entire cremation cost. That was such a relief because I didn't have $4,000. And speaking of money, he owed taxes. I didn't know that, but I got a very hefty bill from the government of Canada saying that the estate owed a certain amount of money. I wrote a letter to the person who sent the bill asking if they could waive that amount, considering that he was on social assistance. 4 months later, I got a letter from the government saying that they waived the tax that he owed. So thankfully, I didn't have to declare bankruptcy on his behalf because that's an added cost as well. I remember contacting a few companies and they were quoting me a couple of $1,000s for bankruptcy. And by the way, my husband did indicate in his last will and testament that he wanted me to declare bankruptcy on his behalf rather than go into debt for his funeral expenses. Another thing that I still have to do, that I need to do this month, is to file his final tax return. He didn't drive, but he had a driver's license, so I had to contact the local services to cancel his driver's license, also to cancel his Medicare card. While I was in town, I decided to go to the library, cancel his library card. He had a few point cards that I canceled as well. To help with the expenses I incurred while closing the estate, I decided to sell his musical instruments, and that helped so much. I offered some of his belongings to a gentleman who I found out later was one of his best friends at the time. But this gentleman, he refused, saying, you know what, I'd rather if you sold those things to make a little bit of money for yourself. He was really, really nice, and he sends me an email once in a while to ask me how I'm doing. Overall, I try not to stay in contact with anyone that he knew, mainly because I don't want to talk about him or his death anymore, but also because I don't really know these people very well. Just talking about psychology for a moment, Sigmund Freud believed that unraveling our issues by talking through them over and over would help us. He called it the talking cure. I love Sigmund Freud, but I disagree that bringing things up over and over could be helpful. I think at the beginning it was important for me to talk about what happened and how I felt about it. And it's important for me now to talk about what happened during the relationship because I silenced myself for too many years out of fear. But talking about how I was feeling with regards to his suicide over and over with friends and family kept me in that moment. I found it very hard to move past it when I was talking about it over and over. I did do a little bit of therapy right after it happened, but I didn't think that it was really helping me, so I decided I would just do it my way. As I record this, it's been nearly a year since he took his life, and as I mentioned before, the last thing that I have to do is file his tax returns, and then his estate is completely closed. There are a lot of things in the basement boxes that I have to go through, and I'm hoping to be able to sell some more things to continue to help myself make a little bit of money because it was a hard adjustment going from 2 incomes to 1 income. But I managed it by cutting down expenses, selling what I could, being as frugal as possible, and just making do with less. I still have a long way to go financially, but I'm on my way, crawling out of that hole of financial difficulties. Having a good support system around you is so important. I don't have any living family members myself, but I do have a beautiful bunch of friends who were there for me throughout the whole ordeal and now. At this point, I don't need to talk about it anymore because I believe that I've moved on. I still grieve once in a while, but it's not as devastating as it was when he first died. I still have conversations with friends about him, but it's different now. It's not as desperate anymore. But I have to say, though, having a group of friends that helped me so much, and having my 5 dogs as well, helped me get out of bed, helped me to realize that, you know what? No matter what happens to you, life goes on. Life isn't going to stop because I'm grieving or because I broke my finger, right? We need to grieve. We need to process our emotions, but we also need to try to move on in order to continue to lead a healthy life. I still feel very sad about the choice he made. I've mentioned in a few videos that we were about to separate and he was going to move out. We both agreed to that. But in fact, he never had the intention of ever moving out. If it were up to me, we would have spent some time apart, done some therapy individually, and come back to each other in a more loving way. But he couldn't see that vision. And that's the part that's most sad to me, is that I could see us getting back together after some hard work in therapy, but he couldn't. So that's what happened in the months following his suicide. I hope that was informative for you. I had no idea what was in store whatsoever. At that time, I didn't even have a last will and testament written for myself. I have since changed that, and I have a notarized will and testament now, but I think the most important thing for me to underline here is to make sure you have a clear notarized will and testament. If my husband hadn't done that, I suspect his family would have come here and taken a lot of his things. And I'm not saying that with any malice. That was just the impression that I got from them at the time when I decided to read the will to them. Just because we were considered common law married didn't mean that I had the right to all of his things and even to his remains. There's something called succession law, and it indicates that common law spouses do not automatically have the right to their spouse's investments, property, or assets. And this is if there is no will and testament. If there is a will and testament, I mean, but if there's no will and testament, the estate has to go through probate, and that's where things can get sticky with family members. So do your beneficiaries a favor, and please, my friends, invest a little time and money for a proper last will and testament. Another important thing to do, especially if you have a big family, is set some money aside for your funeral expenses. I am super grateful that the government paid for his cremation, but that may not always be the case. Some people want to have a funeral, you know, with a nice casket, a burial plot, and all of those things add up. And you certainly don't want, you know, to leave your beneficiaries with the cost of your funeral. Closing up someone's estate is very emotional. It's a lot of work. It can be overwhelming. So the more exact and precise you can be in your last will and testament, the better it will be for your executor and for all of your beneficiaries. In a future video, I'm going to talk about how I went through the grieving process on my own. I'm going to talk about some of the things that I did that really, really helped me during that time. Remember, friends, if you'd ever like to send me a message or ask me to discuss a topic, please feel free to leave comments in the videos or go check out my channel description. That's where you'll find my email address where you can contact me. So, I hope that by sharing this with you, it gave you some kind of idea of what to expect when a spouse dies, and also maybe some advice on what you need to do to prepare for your own end-of-life expenses. Thank you so much for watching. Be well, my friends, and I'll see you next time. Bye.